I'm going to start this because we got a fairly long program. We got a lot of detail on the slides before we get into talking to Dan, and Dan has been kind enough. So I'm going to try not to waste his time. We're going to get this thing rolling. This is the Intelligent Vehicle Briefs webcast for January 13th, 2021. Welcome, everyone. And we are recording. Webcast content is two parts, three parts actually. New mobility news of the week with Steve and Gabe. And then if you have comments, feel free. Best to put them in the chat box. The deep dive is LCFS plus AVs plus EVs plus mass. Did we get enough acronyms in there? Plus epsilon equals what? Dr. Dan Sperling will chat with us about many things sustainable, mostly about air and transportation issues, fuels, that kind of stuff. He is a member of the California Air Resources Board. He's a professor at UC Davis, an author. He has a lot of roles, and he's very good at all of them. And I remember when I tried to put some of this stuff into text on LinkedIn, etc., I ran out of space because he wears so many hats. Number three, networking in Zoom rooms. We're going to try this. We haven't done it before. We've done a shout out for startups, but we're going to network in Zoom rooms. And if you could have your LinkedIn QR code up on your phone, I'll show you later how to do that if you don't know how to do it. But have your LinkedIn QR code pulled up on your phone. It's about the best way I can think of getting contact information transferred between people. It's the simplest way to do it once you get in a chat room. So we'll do that. Polling question: should Apple buy or develop EV/AV? If buy, who should Apple consider buying? And send us a message about the buy or develop, the who and the why. Okay. So in terms of stories, first story I want to get on is one that we've dealt with indirectly. We had a solid-state battery, a couple of solid-state battery guys, James Trevi and Mike Rosenberg from Prieto Battery, who's building a solid-state battery for a truck company called Hercules. And we had two lines of thought about what was going to happen with batteries. And the one line of thought came from Mike Rosenberg, who actually isn't here today. He's on a funding call with investors. He sent me an apology, but I told him we were going to talk about him. So Mike said, we were talking about legacy car owner manufacturers versus startups. And James and I were of the opinion that legacy car manufacturers were going to have a hard time getting out of their own way, that they weren't the ones to watch to really, stake out some territory quickly, and Tesla's an example of that. But Mike said that Toyota had been working on solid-state batteries for 10 years, and he expected them to come up and he could bite them all in the you-know-what, because they had a head start on solid-state batteries. Well, a couple of weeks ago, the article started coming out. Toyota's launching a car either next year or year after that's going to be based on a solid-state battery. You would think that Mike was right, and James and I, who said the legacy car companies were going to have a hard time getting out of their way, were wrong. But a couple of days later, Wall Street Journal came out with an article about the head of Toyota, who started throwing shade on EVs and saying EVs had all these environmental problems, et cetera, the old stuff you've heard before. And so the general consensus was Toyota couldn't get out of their own way. They've got a great product coming up, but the head of Toyota doesn't want to move away from ICE, understandably. I guess it's a tough move. QuantumScape is another one. We had a battery expert that told me that QuantumScape was a shell and basically a startup, and there are now lawsuits on QuantumScape's effort to build investments, et cetera, efforts to build a solid-state battery. Apple's talking about building a car. Apple and Sony's got one testing on the road right now, believe it or not. And that gets back to the thing about what a car is now. A car is a big electronics package, basically. And so Apple is is talking about doing that. Well, they want to build a car, and they don't really have the experience of building a car. So how do you do that? Well, there's 3 different ways to do that Apple's come up with. They're talking to Hyundai, and I guess they're pretty close to an agreement with Hyundai to build the car for them in the U.S. They're talking to Arrival. Arrival is an electric truck manufacturer. Arrival has a cool thing. What they're doing is a small footprint factory that it's 10,000 square foot factory, and they're going to build their trucks in a 10,000 square foot factory. Apple has a lot of real estate like that. That could be an interesting fit. And then the final option is Magna. Magna is a car manufacturer out of where are they? Out of Austria, and they have a plant in Canada, and they build bespoke cars for various companies. They're working on the Fisker Ocean up in Canada, I gather. And so that would be the third option for them. So there's more than one way to build a car. You don't have to buy a whole company. You can just buy the service. And, that makes it interesting. So we're going to talk about Honda and GM, but I'm going to turn it over to Gabe to talk about this because this folds right into what we're talking about, how you're going to build your first car. Honda's kind of, like Toyota, is kind of reluctant to put their toe in the water. Gabe? You want to jump in?
Well, Honda is and GM are partnering, and GM is going to be building electric vehicles for Honda and their Acura brand in their new factory in Mexico. That's going to be building EVs. So did they get that right? And it's gonna share their new Ultium platform, which is their new kind of modular platform. We've discussed it on a previous show that uses that instead of using a skateboard design, it uses a modular 8-cell design, so you can stack the cells up in different configurations to get different size vehicles, going from a 250-mile range to a 450-mile range, doing everything from, I guess, a sports car all the way to a large delivery van. And I'm going to talk about that in a second, because at the Consumer Electronics Show last night, the GM announced some very interesting initiatives regarding stuff right up our alley in both autonomous vehicles and electric mobility and logistics. I don't know how much we want to get into each one of these programs, Steve, because it's almost a deep dive. But they showed the G-Wiz stuff, which was an eVTOL, an electric vertical takeoff and landing. It's kind of like a large drone that will be used to carry passengers short distances in crowded inner cities. Then they also had a concept of and obviously this is not like a ready for production thing, but rather like a mock-up prototype kind of thing for the show. And then there's also what they call the Cadillac Halo self-driving pod, and which looks like a giant loaf of Wonder Bread with a wheel at each corner, but inside it has this beautiful mid-century modern interior with wood paneling and couches, so people can kind of gather and congregate and socialize inside this vehicle as it's being taken autonomously to its location. And then more in real life, there's also the Celestiq, their flagship electric sedan.
So GM's looking better and better to me, Gabe. If Honda asks, Honda's like quality control central. I love Honda vehicles. I've had them, motorcycles and cars and trucks. And if they're asking GM to build their car, I don't know, that speaks well of GM. I'm back and forth on GM, but
GM's come a long way from the who killed the electric car days. They went from this evil monster that wanted to kind of delay electric. At least their reputation was this evil corporate monster that wanted to delay electrification of the passenger vehicle fleet, to being, at least presenting a very innovative electric vehicle list of solutions. One of the more interesting things I thought for GM was their Bright Drop. Have you read about this, Steve?
Oh, that's the delivery vehicle?
Well, it's Bright Drop is kind of their program for logistics, autonomous logistics and electrified logistics. So the Bright Drop, and it's going to be, they're going to make their first deliveries of this vehicle at the end of the year. And it's basically like a big UPS sized delivery van, and it's going to be electric. But also
250-mile range too, right?
The Bright Drop EV600 can actually up to 250 miles.
Yeah, 250.
Yeah, 600 cubic feet.
Yeah.
And
there have been a lot of van. There have been some van manufacturers out there, but the range has been an issue. There's been like guys that are doing 120 or whatever, and in the package business, I'm not sure that's enough. Buses have have had the same problem, but that's starting to change.
Well, I mean, if you're talking about like an Amazon or a UPS delivery van, I don't think you need more than 100 miles range. But probably the most interesting thing in this Bright Drop program is the EP1, which is actually just an electric pallet, and it's designed to take goods from kind of that, not the last mile, but like the last 20 feet, right? So from the warehouse to the truck, from the truck, to maybe a customer's door or to another warehouse, so that you have the potential to completely eliminate human workers. And for that, GM is also going to develop a line of robotic consumers for when all human workers are unemployed and can no longer afford GM products.
You need to smile after you say that, dude. Nobody knows whether you're telling
that. The last part is not really true.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, that's a question that comes up. What are we going to do? Is that, I mean, I don't know if anybody's seen the video of the CES thing, but I know Gabe was thoroughly impressed by the lyric, all the stuff that was going on at CES with Cadillac, I guess, GM. He got a cool video.
I'll believe it when I see one of these when I see one of these vans outside of my house, or get a ride in the VTOL thing. But
you're such a cynic.
You got to take that stuff with a grain of salt.
You're such a cynic, man. Okay. Are we good? Can I go to Cisco now?
Please.
Okay? All right. Cisco's backing out of smart cities. They're saying they don't have, it's not a revenue. They don't see the revenue potential, I guess, in smart cities. And I was walked into a smart cities meeting with some consultants, engineering guys in Saudi Arabia. And the problem with smart cities, I think, is that they need to be demonstration programs. Somebody needs to map out where the revenue opportunities are to get the private sector in there. And there needs to be some kind of, why. Somebody needs to answer the why fairly clearly on that. Because when we went into that meeting, we didn't have the answer to why. And although Saudi Arabia is now doing it, they've got a city called Neom up by the Red Sea. It's supposed to be a resort. It's supposed to be zero carbon. The question is, why do people want a zero carbon or to be in a smart city environment? And I think this is going to come up again in the program, but I think carbon pricing is one of those partly the answer to that, because you'll want to shed as much carbon as possible if there's carbon pricing, but we'll talk about that later. Mayor Pete is going to be our head of the US DOT, which is cool. It'd be interesting to see, kind of a different generation taking over the US DOT. So that'd be cool to see. This is my rant. I'm looking at everybody building these cars for $60 to $70 to $80,000. You can get to 24 if you get every subsidy known to man on your car. But where's the EV version of the Honda Fit, or what the Honda Civic used to be? A highly dependable family sedan, which is an EV, is affordable, well-equipped for under $20K US. It's not Honda because Honda's building something else. They're building an SUV, so somebody needs to be thinking in that direction, or how shall I say, the government could nudge folks in that direction. Maybe is another way to look at it. So that's my rant for the day. Deep dive. Dan Sperling is here. He's a UC Davis professor. He's going to talk LCFS and a bunch of other things and mass and AV and where this is all going. And I'm going to post the questions. Let's see, where's the chat box? I'm going to post the questions in the chat box. So Dan, let's start with the kind of we've known each other for a while. 25 years ago, we're together in a room in San Diego at a conference I used to run called Tech Trans, and you step in a room and there's the Marine Lieutenant Colonel from DARPA there, and he's talking about, we're talking about fuels, and the Marine Lieutenant Colonel took the position that that everything's going to be electrified in the future. This was 25 years ago, remember, when nothing was electrified, virtually nothing was electrified. And I talked to you later about it, and you said you chose the other side of the coin, which is hydrogen, that hydrogen was the fuel of the future. And you said you chose it just because you know, we needed a discussion, and it made for it did make for a lively discussion. People talked about that discussion for a long time afterwards. So my question to you now is, if you had to lay out what the alternative fuels future look like for us, what's it look like? Is it electric? Is it hydrogen? What else is it? What's it going to look like?
Well, the words I would use is batteries versus hydrogen, because hydrogen fuel cells are electric vehicles. And so when I talk about electrification, even electric vehicles, I generally mean that to include hydrogen fuel cells. But with that qualification, I think we've got a long ways to go. And certainly the battery costs have come down dramatically. You know, they were over $1,000 a kilowatt hour 10 years ago, and now they're getting close to $100. And there's still, you know, even with lithium ion, I know you were talking about solid state, but even lithium ion, we're seeing those costs continue to come down. They're getting better at manufacturing them, designing them, taking some of the cost out of them still. So all of the analyses we see now, including from my shop at UC Davis and my other shop at California Air Resources Board, you know, find that within a few years, battery electric vehicles will be cost competitive on a total cost of ownership basis, you know, so within 5 to 10 years, and not just for cars, but for many of the trucks, some of those delivery trucks you're talking about, you know, where they only need a range of 100, 150 miles, they're going to be cost competitive very soon. So the question becomes, where does hydrogen fit into this, hydrogen fuel cells? And I think what we're going to find is that while we are very glib in saying batteries are cheap and they're going to take over the light duty market, I think that is being glib. There's lots of special cases where the batteries won't be preferred or won't be accepted. You know, there's ideological reasons by some people. There's other cases, people live in apartment buildings and condos. They don't have easy places to charge. You've got people that live out in rural areas that might have other reasons for not wanting to go batteries. And so I think even in light duty, we're going to see hydrogen playing some role. And a lot of it depends on these companies, you know, whether they're serious. Is Toyota really serious? Is Honda, are they really serious about fuel cells in the light duty market? Heavy duty market, for sure, we're going to see fuel cells. I think there's no doubt about that. My California Air Resources Board, we just adopted rules in June setting us on a path to electrify all truck, or to make all trucks zero emission or close to zero emission. We adopted regulations that require most of trucks, 75% of sales of most truck categories to be zero emitting by 2035. And even long haul, the requirement is 40% being zero emitting by 2035. And certainly for the delivery trucks, the class 3, 4, 5 trucks that we talk about, batteries probably will dominate, but not necessarily, for all vehicles. But then you get into the bigger trucks, the class 7 and 8, the long hauls, and batteries really are problematic in those, even though Elon says he's going to do it. But, the reality is the batteries still, even if they're relatively cheap, they're still big, heavy, and take up a lot of space. And
the deal is there's a limit on what you can put on a highway. And so that puts a constraint on how heavy your vehicle can be. And the heavier your vehicle is, the less packages, less load it can carry. And so you get into that math in package trucks or in semis, I guess. So let's talk about CARB. You guys have the LCFS, and you were supposed to achieve some things by 2020. Well, 10% reduction of something. I can't remember. You tell me, Dan. How are you guys doing?
Actually, the low carbon fuel standard is I'd even say a surprising success story.
You wrote it, right? You wrote the initial version of it.
Back in 2007, Governor Arnold asked myself and a professor from UC Berkeley to come up with a design or a proposal for it. And we put together a team of people from UC Berkeley, UC Davis. And what we proposed was adopted almost verbatim the way we proposed it, including a lot of the details. But it's had it was unloved for many years. It was an unloved baby. It was, I'd say, the advanced. What's that?
Problem child? To start out?
Well, I think just unloved.
Okay. It didn't misbehave. It was just unloved.
Exactly. Okay. So, in the beginning, it was the advanced biofuel companies were basically the only, constituency, the only supporters that we had of it. But over time, what happened is a lot of these different companies and industries started realizing that there was a lot in it for them. So of course the electric utilities started realizing that they could get credits for selling electricity to electric vehicles. And then the natural gas utilities, who are under a lot of pressure to shift away from fossil gas, they started realizing they could do biogas, renewable natural gas, get a lot of credits for that were worth a lot and made it a viable business. And then you had the car companies started to see that we were bundling together credits to be used as a rebate. So it just started a month ago, where now if you buy an electric car, you get about a $1,500 rebate, which are these bundled credits from the electric utilities. And then even the oil companies, we set it up. We've started making some small adjustments so that like hydrogen stations get special credits. And so now Shell Oil is building, tens of, I think they're planning 20, 30, 40 hydrogen stations in California because of that change we made, because it provides a lot of incentive, essentially a subsidy. And then even we put in credits for upstream innovation. So if you put in a solar farm at these oil fields to replace natural gas that might be used there, you get credit for that. If you do CCS, carbon capture sequestration, you get credit. So basically what's happened is that almost everyone's come to love it. We've gone from it being unloved to being fully loved. And it's actually one of the big success stories, both in terms of its actual accomplishment as well as in a political and economic sense.
And it was implemented by a Republican. That's amazing. That's cool. I mean, you know, the late version of Republicans hasn't been so warm to that kind of innovation.
And I should say there's a good chance this is going to be adopted nationally. Yeah. So there's a coalition that's been formed. You got the ag interests, you got the electric vehicle and NGO interests all coming together on this, and all of the, the Biden people, the House, when they put out the select committee, their climate plan last summer, all of them have endorsed a national LCFS. So there's a reasonable possibility we're going to see it go national.
So I have a question about, I'm going to give you the background on this. So I'm brainstorming on buying I will buy a 2-year-old, whatever. And so I'm going to go from an unconstrained set. So I look at cars that I think have a good repair record. And I was looking at the Hyundai Genesis. And I said, well, that's a cool car. It's got a good repair record. It's a lot. The depreciation, the value, operating value is probably higher. It depreciates because people don't know about the Genesis, et cetera, et cetera. I said, but it's a gasoline. It's an ICE vehicle. And then I said, well, think about that. What's going to happen with fuels other than clean fuels, carbon-less fuels, is that they're going to become less expensive because there'll be less demand for them and the prices will go down. And so that would incentivize you to buy a gas car. And I said, well, I said, yeah, that might be true. I said, that introduces the topic of carbon pricing, which would level that incentive, that move as demand for carbon-based fuels became less and the cost went down in the market, you would still have carbon price on there, and it would level that out. Tell me what you think about carbon pricing as an idea, and does it fit with LCFS? And if there's fit issues, what are they?
Well, economists love pricing. And
engineers do too.
Maybe some engineers. But the reality is, in the political world, taxes and fees are not very popular. And in fact, I think neither the Republicans nor Democrats are embracing pure market instruments, pure taxes like carbon taxes. So I think that we have to do a little workaround on it as we go forward. But I would say that, like the low carbon fuel standard. So I think what we're doing, where we're going with policy, is we're creating hybrids of regulatory instruments and market instruments. So the low carbon fuel standard is a perfect example of that. The way that works is we tell an oil company, you must reduce the carbon intensity of your fuel. So the rule was 10% by 2020 and now 20% by 2030. And so the oil companies have the option. They can either figure out how to do it, which is very difficult to do with, if you just do a straight oil product, what are you going to do to it to reduce the carbon intensity? There's only so much you can do because there's so much carbon in it. But if you can't or won't or don't want to, you buy credits from others. So that's where you buy the credits from the natural gas utilities that are making biogas, or the dairy digesters. You buy it from the electric utilities that are selling clean electricity for the electric vehicles, renewable diesel, the biofuels that are coming out. So they buy them. So what's created is a true market. It is a carbon market. And actually the carbon price in the LCFS is over $200 per ton. And wow. So it's such a high number, it's such a high value that it really is motivating a lot of investment. And that's why the LCFS has been so successful, is that it is a market based, and it really is functioning well. And it really is motivating a lot of these investments in the biogas, the renewable natural gas, and the electric vehicles, and the renewable diesel. So it is, and I'll just give you a couple other quick examples of kind of hidden carbon pricing, hidden in the sense the consumer doesn't see it, but it is how it's functioning. Like electric cars, Elon Musk and Tesla would not exist today. They would have gone bankrupt except for the credits that they've been able to sell under the zero emission vehicle program. So California requires, car companies to sell a certain amount of electric vehicles or zero emission vehicles. They can be hydrogen also. And if they can't or won't or don't want to, they can buy credits from other car companies. And so who out there had all these credits to sell? Tesla. So though for the early Model S's, when Tesla was in, at the edge of bankruptcy, they were selling those credits for about $25,000 per car. They were attracting about $25,000 in credits, for credits they would sell for every Model S they were selling. And that is the reason why Tesla did survive. And now the credit price, the value of those credits is less, partly because, over time we've been adjusting the credit price, and partly because there were a lot of incentives early on for longer range EVs. But even now, the prices are not well known because they're not publicly available. They're based upon bilateral trades. But it's probably, for the electric vehicles today, it's at least a few $1,000s per car, per electric vehicle that's sold, depending on its range and size. What did I say? It's a few $1,000s per car. So again, cool. This is what's, we are using carbon pricing, just not in a fully transparent way. Transparent to consumers.
But you think the LCFS, some version of the LCFS might become implemented nationally?
Yep, I think there's a good possibility. Canada is just about to adopt it. They're issuing final regulations. They're calling it a clean fuel standard. Oregon already did. And so I think, who knows, who knows, who can predict politics these days, but there's a lot of momentum. And, it's the kind of thing that it's attractive because there's not going to be a tax. A lot of, remember when when candidate Biden put out his climate plan, he said, it's going to be a $4 billion plan or something like that. But here we're talking about something that there's no cost to taxpayers and no cost to government. The low carbon fuel standard. And so I think those are the kind of policies that are going to take root. Another one, my other favorite policy these days that has not been adopted yet is the fee bait. And that's the idea where if you buy a gas guzzler, you pay a fee. If you buy a very efficient or electric vehicle, you get a rebate. And so again, you're adjusting market signals in a way to, in this case, encourage consumers to buy an electric car, but there's no taxes, there's no government, you make this revenue neutral, so there's no cost to government, no cost to taxpayers, but yet there is still it creates a strong market signal. So I think these are examples of where we're going to go.
Yeah. So, and Doug Aldi, if you want to unmute yourself, you want to say something. He's a professor from DU, and he's a fan of carbon pricing. And I see he posted something in the chat box. Doug, do you want to unmute yourself and say something?
Yeah, I would say a couple of things with regard to carbon pricing. I think it can get pretty broad Democratic support, which is really somewhat ironic since it really is a conservative market-based thing that's not getting Republican support. it is not clear that CLFS or LCFS, I misspelled it in the chat, can get widespread Republican support. So I have a feeling that there's going to have to be a sort of a melange of the two policies. I think, I'm working for an organization that you may be familiar with called the Citizens Climate Lobby. And we believe that a carbon pricing policy should be the center of any long-term policy. As you say, we do have support from economists. I'm not sure we have support from Republicans, although that could change.
Well, you have my support, but I'm one of those unusual people that I'm working in the political world. I sit on a board member for Air Resources Board. So I see the politics up front, but also an academic. And, I have lots of aspirations for what's the best thing to do. But I think here's a case where we're aiming for second best solutions. And yes, a carbon tax or cap and trade is very desirable. And we have it, of course, we've adopted in California and a lot, in some other places, Europe, of course. But the reality is we can't push the price of that. Even when we do it, we're having a lot of trouble pushing the price up high enough for it to have a big effect. And so, like I described with the low carbon fuel standard, you got $200 per ton, which is far higher than anything we'll be able to get out of a carbon tax for a very long time. So I think I agree that a carbon price, so what we're doing in practice is creating a carbon price in these different ways in a more segmented, fragmented way. But it's fairly, it's not as good as a good, strong carbon price, but it's second best. And I think it's much easier politically to get these through. And to get them through in a way that they really are effective.
So we need ranked choice voting, obviously, for this, because if we had ranked choice voting, we could get to consensus. Is that true? Would you settle, Doug? Would you settle for a national LCFS?
So CCL, Citizens Climate Lobby, their policy is, we're promoting a carbon tax, or actually a revenue neutral carbon tax. We have three criterion for any policy. One, that it's effective. Two, that it does not hurt low income users. And three, that it's bipartisan. And if those are satisfied, I think CCL would certainly support any program So I think it's very clear that we will need to compromise in this Congress to get anything through. And I'm actually very encouraged on the political side. I'm very encouraged by the fact that there seems to be a bipartisan group of sort of moderate Republicans and Democrats in both the House and the Senate who may be able to push a lot of this stuff through in spite of the leadership. So, and I will say one other thing. I'm on a really early learning curve about electric vehicles.
Yeah.
But I have to say that I am very encouraged by this discussion here. Because, in fact, the electric sector is probably the easiest sector to decarbonize. And if we're getting more and more electric vehicles on the road, that just makes it easier to reduce our carbon emissions. So this is a very encouraging discussion for me.
Well, yeah. Doug, you walked with me in the park. You know that once you get me started, you can't stop me about EVs, which is one good thing I have a program, huh? There's a place to put that stuff. But here's what I see happening. California, Dan, correct me on these numbers, is about 3% total EVs of all the I think this is passenger vehicles in California are 3% of the cars on the road are EVs, and about 8% of the sales last year were EVs. Is that right? Do you have that?
Yes, that is right.
So when you think about it, you go, ooh, man, there's Gabe and I live in this world where there's EVs everywhere. I mean, that's all we see, or I do anyway. Gabe, speak up if that's true of you. But anyway, and so, but that's the leading state in the union. That's 3% vehicles and 8% sales, new sales. You have to watch those two numbers because they get confused easily. And the question is, and as this ramps up, are there going to be people who stand in the way? Well, the head of Toyota has the answer for the near term. They've been working on it. They're ready to roll it out, and he's throwing shade on EVs. So I think we get to we have to watch about certain things. That's why I'm worried about quality control at Tesla. Tesla's had some quality control issues. If the word gets out that EVs aren't dependable, that will hurt the market and the uptake of EVs.
So, Steve, I think you have to think about this. You got three groups basically out there. You got the consumers, you got the auto industry, and you got policy. And I think if you look at it in terms of policy, there is a growing commitment to electrification. And you see now, I mean, the United States is the laggard on this. The EU is now pushing ahead very aggressively on electric vehicles, much more than the US. China is pushing ahead equally, even more aggressively, and far, far more than the US. And so, but now you see countries like Korea and Japan are all starting to adopt these very aggressive electrification goals. They talk about bans on gasoline vehicles, and that's not exactly how the regulatory process works, because it's really more requiring electric vehicles. But so I think the policy world is now really getting on the bandwagon. And one of the reasons they're doing that is because all of these cost projections we're doing show that electric vehicles are going to be cost competitive on a total cost of ownership basis. That means that it's good for the economy. We're getting to the point where, and for many uses of vehicles and many vehicles, it's good for the economy. And so this is not something that, is going to be a drag on the economy. And so I think the policymakers are seeing that. And then you have the auto industry. So the auto industry is fully committed to electrification, whether fuel cells or batteries. The question for them is, how fast is it going to happen? And of course, for the legacy automakers, slower is better, just because that's how the industry works. But, you see companies like VW now, they're making a massive, massive investment in EVs. But even all the others are too. And it's really just a question of, how aggressive are the consumers? Are the policymakers going to be? And part of that will depend on consumers coming along. But I think the policy there, the industry is ready if the consumers buy. And so now we're really at the question of getting consumers engaged. And that is problematic, by the way. We do a lot of research at UC Davis on the consumer market. And we're finding, even in California, there's a relatively small percentage of the population that really knows anything about electric vehicles and the incentives available and so on. And it's really shocking, that we find maybe 25% of consumers, 25% of car buying consumers, which is a subset, people that actually buy new cars, are really, have a pretty good awareness of what the options are and so on. And it hasn't been changing much, over the last few years. And this is California, where we've got the governors and we got everyone talking about it. Like Steve, you talk about all your neighbors, all your friends, but it's clusters of people. And we're still struggling with the broader market. So, if we can get consumers along, this is going to happen very fast. And we, the California Air Resources Board, we are in the process of adopting regulations that will be ramping up to 100, some close to, if not 100%, requirement for EVs by 2035.
Wow. When I plot that out, that looks pretty intense, Dan. I got to say, let me get back to what I was saying about Tesla. That's why Tesla performance is important, because if your car can't, only gets 50% of the mileage in cold weather, or if it has problems, and Tesla, in long-term car ownership, Tesla is ranked at the bottom of the list by J.D. Powers. They've had quality control issues. It's going to affect consumer perception and uptake. And so that's why it needs to be fixed. It's not about me and Tesla. And I forget, we were supposed to say some kind of mantra about Tesla before we say anything negative of Gabe, and I can't remember what it was. They've got a great car company. They've done a great job. Their products are exceptional, but they've had a quality control problem. And so I'm worried about that. And the battery issues that have come up, and other companies, et cetera, et cetera. I'm sensitive to it because I recommend people to buy the cars, and if they have problems with them, I hear about it. But as we get, we're not mainstream yet. We're 3% and 8% in California, which is the strongest state possible. So we need to get past this quality control stuff. Is all I'm saying. I agree with you, Dan. It's happening. It seems like we've got a window here to make this all happen, but we got to be a little careful about it. That's not something you or I have control over. It's just I'm bringing it up because I think it's relevant.
I see some things in the chat box about the price of these EVs, and what we have to realize is that new cars are bought by rich people. Okay, so like about 1/3, like about 30% of the population of the households buy almost all the new cars. It's only less than 1/3 of the households are buying new cars. And so, that, and the transaction price now of new cars in the US is $40,000 average.
Yeah, 37 actually, but yeah.
And, and so this is what people are buying for new cars. Now, yes, over time, we need to bring down, the cost and the price of electric vehicles, so that it gets through, into the used car market and so on, and more people have access to it. But, this is a process, things don't happen overnight. We're only talking in California, 8% of the market, in the US overall, it's only about 2 or 3% of sales. So it's like the challenge right now is just to get good product out there. And, yes, we shouldn't be subsidizing, the rich people that are buying the Teslas, but we're starting to adjust our policies and incentives, so that's not happening. But this is a process, and, car companies, they can't lose money, to start out, or we'll never get them to really invest in a big way. So you got to bring them in. It's like all new products. They're more expensive in the beginning, and as they, in their niche, and then the costs come down as they become more widely accepted, scale economies and so on.
Yeah. I did some math on this, and the deal is that in 1963 you could buy a Chevy Malibu for about $2,300, and if you do the interest rate, whatever growth rate in the U.S. economy is about 2.5%. The growth rate in the cost of automobiles is 3.25%. What that means is in the next 10 to 15 years, that's going to push us toward autonomous vehicles, because you're going to have some kind of cooperative corporate ownership of vehicles, and that's where why autonomous vehicles will be necessary, at least in my mind. What do you think about that, man?
Okay, now that's a great if we look at these automated vehicles, I call them automated, not autonomous, because they're not really autonomous. That's a misuse of the English language.
I hate it too.
Thank you, Google, for that. But, you know, because they are connected. They're automated and connected.
Yeah.
And so therefore,
autonomous means free from something, which is like, why do vehicles have to be free from human control? There's no necessary, that doesn't.
It was Silicon Valley, wording that led to that. But anyway, so, the challenge here, I think where you were going, Steve, the vision is that you want these automated vehicles to be used by mobility as a mobility service. And so companies operating it, and that way you get more people using it and you're using them more efficiently. But that's not how it's going to play out unless we have some kind of policy intervention. Most likely what's going to happen is, as I said, most new cars are bought by more affluent people. And so an automated car comes out, it costs $5,000, $10,000, $15,000 extra. But then you look at it and say, okay, well, this can be my office. This can be my bedroom. This can be my entertainment complex. I don't care, how long I'm in the vehicle. I can commute long distance and it's, and it's not an issue for me. And so if we left things alone, from a policy perspective, I would expect that most of these automated vehicles would go into the household personal vehicle market. Certainly Uber and Lyft and others and Waymo are going to be pushing hard, to bring them into their applications because that's where it does make the most economic sense. But the personal market, I think, unless we do something to direct these vehicles to a service, a mobility service application, it won't happen in a major way. So we've got to figure out how to support that shift.
I don't know. I'm saying, I guess what I'm saying, Dan, is it's at $37,000 or $40,000 per car per, whatever. That's what they pay for the average household for a car. I think part of the reason that we have two workers in every household is in order to afford that lifestyle, they've got to go to work. There was one worker in a household in 1963. And so, the escalation in price of vehicles is going up way faster than the wages. And eventually it's going to put a substantial portion of the population out of the market, and they'll need shared ride vehicles. And so that's where the market for autonomous vehicles is coming. That's my.
Okay. I'll be a little bit of a devil's advocate. Please. Because, if you look at the market today, it's that $37,000, $40,000 price. It's been going up. If you look at the products that have been selling, it's the big SUVs loaded up with all kinds of stuff and gizmos. That's where the automotive market is. That's where they make the car companies make their money. That's what people are buying for new vehicles. Again, it's because, we've created, unfortunately, a society, an economy in the U.S. where, the well-off are getting better off and the less well-off are getting worse off. But it's the well-off that are buying these vehicles. And so the trend, if anything, is that they are willing to pay more and more, but it is just, a segment of the economy of this society. And that's a big, big problem, but that is the trend. Yeah.
So, I guess I'm saying, well, how do we solve that problem? And one way it looks like we could solve that problem is Canoe or whoever is Uber or, GM, Cruise, I guess. GM is doing Cruise, and I don't know, GM seems to have a pretty good, they're looking more and more like they know what's going on. They're a little slow on the uptake, but they seem to know what's going on. So that's what I think. Any more questions? We're going to have to wrap this up. I was going to do some networking, but unless you guys want to stick around for it, we need to get ready to shut this down. Dan, what a treat. I knew this would be good, talking to you. And something's going to come up. Usually a couple months happen and somebody will come up and say, yeah, what about that thing or whatever. Someday we may want to ask you back and have you talk to us more about, you know, whatever we have a passion for, you and I both have a passion for. So I'll leave that open, and I want to thank you for coming. Let me get back into the slide deck here and close this guy out for us.
So thank you, Steve. It's been a pleasure. I was just getting warmed up, so I'd be happy to come back sometime.
Yeah, man, I can tell. I'm with you. We could go on forever because I think we're simpatico about this stuff. Does anybody want to do networking? Send a yes in the text if you want to do networking. We can go to that. It's a little complicated to do it because it takes having a QR code ready. But upcoming webinars, we're bringing DARPA back, Dan. I thought about them. I said, you know, they got some cool stuff. Usually have some cool technology, and so they have this a couple of really cool vehicle technologies that they're working on. They're going to talk to us, and then we're going to bring smart cities in. Vincent Lachère of Suez is going to walk us through how cities will need to adapt to AVs, urban design issues, and then plus what it takes to put a smart autonomous shuttle on the road from OV Tech, which is a manufacturer of autonomous vehicles. Those are the future shows. We're on YouTube. You type intelligent vehicles briefs in YouTube. That's the best way to go. And I could put a URL up there, but it's complicated. And we are looking for sponsors. We could put your name here or at the beginning, actually, as well. And so if you want to be a sponsor, let us know. Summary contact info. We've got Gabe, getshokin at gmail.com. I am at Srooneyconsults at Gmail, and D Sperling is Dan at ucdavis.edu. That's our show for today. Thank you for tuning in.